So whoever is going to be the best participant of this session is getting one shirt like that. And I was told that if I need a couple more, I can get a couple more, so please be active. So hi, my name is Doron Davidson, VP of Global Services at LogPoint. I've joined LogPoint about a year ago through the acquisition of SecBI. I was the founder of SecBI, Security Breach Investigation, whereby we wanted to change the way that hunters hunt for cybersecurity threats within an organization. We thought we can automate it all. Eventually what we came up with, and you know how it is with the startup, you get money to do A, and eventually you do B, C, D, or whatever solution you came up with, which is the best in the market. And eventually what we found out is that SOAR automation was the best thing that we could actually offer hunters and cybersecurity experts, basically, within security operations centers. So that's eventually what LogPoint had acquired 1.5 years ago, fully integrated into our SIEM, and today basically you get, for the price of a SIEM plus SOAR that can automate most of your processes, if not all of them, in your security operations centers. So before I kind of go down the lane of explaining you what automation is, playbooks and so on, I kind of want to understand which ones of you are already using playbooks within their security operations centers. I see 1, 2, 3, 5, 22. Excellent. We stopped at 3 actually, but no worries. How many of you are working in a security operations center, either as an analyst, SOC manager, anything? Excellent. So the potential is great. There are a lot of people here that would like or might want to start using automation and to use playbooks. And by the way, I've interchangeably used these two words, automation and playbooks, but in reality, these are two separate things, and we will differentiate between them in just a second. Let's see that this works. It does. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about the security landscape the security landscape challenges, and I will try to make it a bit shorter. One, because I believe that most of you already know some of it, if not all. Two, because you've heard about that today from Jesper, our CEO. You've heard about that from Victor and from Martha, which is in the crowd, and Christian also talked a bit about those challenges, but those challenges fit very well our discussion around automation and playbooks, and that's why it is important to kind of mention how these challenges are basically connected. Then we'll define what are playbooks, automation, the difference between them and orchestration. We'll talk about the benefits of playbooks and automation, talk about some of the common use cases. I will try and do this a bit interactive. You don't necessarily need to know who the person next to you is, because I know competition and so on. That said, I would like to also hear from you, what are the use cases that you face within your security operations centers? How do you solve them? And we'll try to enrich everyone with this kind of knowledge so that when you leave here today, it's not just about my experience with some of our customers, but also about what you guys are already doing, and maybe your peers can learn from you, you can collaborate. And by the way, hackers are collaborating between themselves. Why shouldn't we also collaborate? And that's part of why within our customer success, we're also trying to build this network of collaboration between all of our customers. Then we'll go over 3 stories or 3 use cases. The first one, onboarding and offboarding of employees. We've actually, in the session before this, we did touch that in just a bit when we talked about SAP security. And here we're going to talk about the processes starting from HR down to IT, how IT are managing these very complex processes, making sure that they reduce risk within the organization. Then we'll talk about conditional access management, Azure. We'll get a bit deeper here into how do we actually start building a playbook based on the use cases, on a specific use case, and how different playbooks also relate to each other within the same use case. And finally, we're going to talk about phishing. Yes, I know. Every session that you go to, we hear about phishing. Even today, we've heard about phishing a couple of times. Maybe you have not heard that between the lines, but when Victor talked about Petya and not Petya, the main distribution was through phishing. Still, phishing is being the #1 attack vector or distribution for for most attacks. I think 83% based on the latest Verizon report. 83% of all attacks start from a phishing attack, basically. So we're going to talk about phishing. We're going to talk about specific use case from one of our customers. They have a reported phishing button within their Outlook. So every and they do have either Mimecast or some other mail gateway that stops many of their phishing emails. Still, they have this button, and you'll be surprised. They have over 9,000 clicks per year of their employees of a suspected phishing email. How many of those do you suspect are real phishing cases? Who says more than 5%? Who says more than 10%? More than 20? You're optimistic. You're right to be optimistic. The real number, you'll need to wait for the end of the session. And last but not least, we'll talk about best practices, how to build playbooks, how to build automation, some of the best practices that we kind of gained while delivering our services to our customers, what worked even better, and then a summary. And if you have any additional questions, I'll give you my email at the very end, and happy to connect with you afterwards. And of course, we'll have the best participant getting a t-shirt. LogPoint branded t-shirt. So, first of all, security landscape challenges. And a lot of things have changed during the corona. We kind of saw that many organizations tried to move to a more digitalization environment pre-corona, but during corona, they had to expedite that significantly faster. And we see today employees joining or connecting to the organization's cloud, or an organization would have a hybrid cloud environment, employees connecting from home, from their own environment, through VPN. Different ways of connectivity basically brings up additional challenges for IT management in order to really track all of those security controls within the organization. We've heard today in one of the sessions that an average organization has between 50 to 70 security controls. That's just a number people throw out. How many security controls do you have? More than 100? More than 80? I have 20. Who has more? 25. Who has more? 30? More? More than 30? More than 40? Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, 120. I think it's hard to beat 120. I've actually been to a couple of large financial institutions in the US. They didn't give me a number of 120, but they did give me a number of between 90 and 100. But the interesting thing about those numbers, it's not just about how many security controls you have. It's also about what types of security controls you have. Is it home-built, or is it an external vendor that actually would provide you with documentation, APIs, logs that you can then feed into a great security system like LogPoint that can help you detect, investigate, respond, and so on. But when you have a homegrown security system, it's much harder. Do you have custom-built security solutions as well? How do you integrate those to your SIEM? Yeah. Is it via logs, APIs, or you have to monitor it separately? Okay. Not yet. Got you. Well, it's difficult. It's difficult because you now need to have a separate dedicated team that would look at those kind of events, alerts, and try to make sense of them. Not only try to make sense of them, when you have such a complex environment, it's how do you build the context around the specific attack. If you see an attack coming from phishing, from mail, and now I see an alert on my EDR, and maybe yesterday there was another alert on my firewall. Are they all connected? Are they telling the same story, or are they 3 separate stories. If I now actually respond to that specific alert, and I stop the communication on my web gateway of phishing email that was trying to communicate with NotPetya, kill switch, for example, am I stopping the full attack vector, or I still have malware within my organization that can continue living off the land or do some other stuff within my environment? So all of those making the environment significantly more complex and making the need to really build the full context of the attack significant. And you can do that manually. You can have security researchers, such as some of you guys here, guys in their credentials, access, and so on, so that you can actually run those automations, while the idea of having one centralized SOAR is to be able to do that for all of your different use cases. That said, I had a customer that wanted us to activate the response of their phishing vendor, because it was set up already before we've set up our SIEM SOAR, and that was fine. We have done that. Maybe in the future they'll decide to change the integration, I don't know. But yeah, it's possible, and that's one, and that's an additional use case. What else? So these are some of the use cases that we've seen recently. Let me see the time. That we've seen recently. The 3 that are in red are those that we're going to cover today. But I think that most of the customers that we started speaking with, and it's strange that you guys did not raise that, were either phishing or let's triage our alerts. Why? Because we've activated all of the different rules in the SIEM. We have lots of alerts. We don't know if they're real or not. We now want to triage them so that our analysts will only need to deal with the really critical ones, or the critical and important, and so on. So these are kind of the first 2 that we do, but around malicious network traffic, just the other day we had a customer for whom we're helping. They have Palo Alto with command and control detection, and they wanted us to kind of do the full investigation and response process for whenever command and control communication is detected, kind of going, fetching additional information from the web gateway, from the EDR or Agent X, putting it all together, building the context, responding, and so on. So we are going to cover now 3 use cases. Going to do it deeper and deeper as we go along. We'll start with the onboarding and offboarding of employees. So an onboarding is the process of introducing a new employee to the organization, its culture, and the job responsibilities. That's from HR perspective. From IT perspective, which is much more relevant for this room, it's an onboarding of a new employee includes the steps to ensure that they have the necessary tools and access to perform their job efficiently, effectively, and so on. And this would include anything from Active Directory, Office 365, Salesforce, HR systems, Jira, GitHub, etc. Network access, again, we talked about this before. It can be local, it can be remote, it can be on a VPN, and security credentials, everything from access to confidential information, awareness training, and so on. Everything that IT basically needs to help you as a new employee to kind of understand to do your job effectively. What happens is that there's a lot of risks that are around all of these processes. First of all, we want to make sure that an employee is satisfied. The first 3 months of a new employee within an organization basically will determine for how long he's going to stay within the same organization, according to statistics of some kind of invented paper. That said, there is a real business risk around it, because when that employee will be leaving, whether he's a granted employee, disgranted employee, or whether that employee just left the organization, maybe he was allowed to keep his laptop, and maybe the credentials of that employee into the cloud are still active, and suddenly, without you knowing, that laptop could have been breached, attacked, because now it's connected not to the organization network, but rather at home, and suddenly that that hacker has access to. No, it's not here. Talk about it later. This is how one of the most interesting phishing attacks actually started, by getting an employee's credentials while he was at home with his work machine. So yeah, this is a real risk that organizations need to mitigate, and the time to mitigate it is during the onboarding process. Basically making sure that the full process is bulletproof, that you track and you keep record of all the provision tools that user has, so that when he offboards, you can make sure that you delete the relevant permissions, the relevant user, and so on. So if the savings here on the onboarding is mainly around time saving, and you can see here that from creating a user and then on the Active Directory, setting all the relevant permissions for that user, setting all the relevant systems on the new machine, emailing him with his credentials, informing the different stakeholders that everything is ready and they can email now these credentials to the user, and so on. Instead of doing it between 3 to 5 hours here, it says, and in reality, I've seen organizations where it took almost a week to set up and onboard a new employee. Now it can take you just 5 minutes. So it saved you a lot of time. But on the offboarding part, this is where you can make sure that a disgruntled employee does not retain access to some of your systems. This is where you can make sure that that user would not be attacked afterwards. And by the way, there are some steps that you would probably want to take, ensuring that if that user was let go by mistake and he wants to come back, the information still resides. So instead of deleting user, maybe you just want to suspend it. Maybe you want to make sure that all of the relevant information of that user was kind of copied before or transferred to the manager, and so on. So there are still steps around it, and these are some of the reasons why a lot of the time credentials are just left active. Don't leave them active, but you can still take the necessary steps to make sure that the user cannot, that this user or anyone on his behalf will not take advantage of these credentials. Are these the kind of things that you do today, maybe manually? Who here has an identity management system where he keeps track of all the different solutions that are provisioned for an employee? We have 1, 2, most of you. 80%? Cool, 80% is a good start. Especially if you can automate the offboarding of employee on 80%, that's like really good. It's not yet. Okay, yeah. And it's a good point that goes back to what we talked before about the playbooks. Playbooks would change over time. They will never stay the same. And the same goes to employees. We might even say it somewhere. Access permissions and tool change over time. So you have new tools, you now introduce two-factor authentication, you introduce, so within Logpoint, we've introduced Okta some time ago. So all users are moving basically into Okta, which means that there are some legacy systems where you need to disable users and then after a few days delete those users. So it does change over time, and then we had to change the different playbooks that we have in place and so on for both detection, investigation, and response. So yeah. Yes. So the first thing that I would do is create a list. A list that basically takes us through all the steps that each and every one of the stakeholders need to go through. In this case, it's an example for the IT responsibilities, but just as well, you have responsibilities of HR. What systems do HR need to notify, delete, suspend users on? Then HR needs to open a ticket, for example, that user is living on X date. And then depending on the processes that you would put in place, the playbook would actually pick it up every X amount of hours. You basically set the playbook to look whether there is a new entry. If there is a new entry, what is the date? And then it depends on what kind of systems you have. Some systems you would like to maybe deprovision ahead of time, maybe a week before the user is leaving. For example, if he has a Gmail account, maybe you want to transfer all of that data before he leaves to his manager so that he can kind of sift through it and decide what kind of data is company related, what kind of not, and needs to be deleted or sent back to the employee and so on. Some of the things will happen on the day that he's leaving, and then there's a new process that would start doing all of this deprovisioning and so on. And some of the things, like deleting the actual user, maybe you want them to happen a week after. But eventually all of that needs to be documented in some kind of list. By the way, a list can be even just an Excel file. It's fine. Every organization has their own systems. Some are more expensive, some are simpler to manage. I personally love Excel, but identity management systems of some sort and so on can do probably an even better job. So it all depends on the organization. That does take me to the explanation of some of these playbooks and use cases that I'm showing you are based on a service that we've provided our customers. So we have a playbook design service whereby we come and we interview a customer. What are your processes today? What are you protecting? What are the different security controls that you have and so on? This is where we would also ask you, what are your processes for onboarding and offboarding? We would document all of that and then start building along with the customer the relevant playbook. If he doesn't have a playbook, if they have a playbook, start working on the actual automation of that playbook. Maybe optimize it somewhere where we can, maybe consult on steps that are not necessarily anymore or steps that are missing based on our experience, and then basically build this playbook. Did I answer your question? Okay. We can broaden the discussion afterwards as well. Conditional access management. So conditional access management allows an organization to control access to its resources based on specific condition. Conditional access management is a security approach that allows an organization to control access to its resources based on specific conditions such as user identity, device type, location, risk level, and so on. Basically, that's the system that allows different users to connect to different systems depending on where it's connecting from, and so on. It basically allows organization to have an improved security, but also have flexibility. When you have different groups and you want to allow all of your engineering group access to your development environment, but all of your marketing to not have access to any development environment, this is the system that allows you this kind of flexibility, better visibility as to who has access to what kind of system and so on. So we had a customer that asked us to take care of their Azure conditional access policy changes. Why? Because when someone was making a change, others were not aware of that change happening. And they didn't know whether it's someone internally that have done that, or maybe someone externally had managed to make changes to those access policies. So what we've basically designed with this customer, and they had kind of a playbook. It was even written on a piece of paper, what it is that they do on a daily basis. They logged in, they were trying to see and understand whether any policies names were modified or changed, when, if there was a change, when it happened, what is the current status, who's the user that had done those changes, and so on and so forth. So he kind of went through this process with the customer and designed with him how would he like the automation playbook based on this process to run. And this is more or less what we've designed, only it wasn't in pink. So before running the playbook for the first time, we've already built a list, a static list within the SIEM with the definition of all of this information of the existing policy names, when was the last change of those policies, who changed them, and their current status. Then every 4 hours the playbook should run, should log into Azure Access Management, check the policy changes, and check if there were any new policy names that were defined, any policy state that were changed, disabled, enabled, and so on. When was it changed, who changed it, and so on. If no change was done, great, we can continue. But if changes were done, we actually want to document that back into the SIEM, maybe email the IT manager to notice it, and in this specific case, they actually wanted us to open a ticket in their ticketing system, I think it was Freshdesk, to report that specific change, so that the SOC can then also verify that this change is a legitimate change. So there is a difference between IT that is managing these changes and then the SOC that wants to be able to know when these changes are happening. This is the playbook that came out of this whole process. So the process of working with the customer is, one, we interview, we understand the use case, we present it back using this pink flow, and then only when it is approved, we kind of start building the playbook and then pass it into a user acceptance test or a development environment, having the customer review it, make sure that it fits the expectations, and then put it into production, where it also generates reports, whoever asks for the reports, and the case management and so on. If you have questions, do ask. A second challenge that the same customer had around the same use case of conditional access management was block on international access policies. So that specific customer is an American customer. They did not allow any connectivity from outside of the US, definitely not from China, to connect to their system. That said, they did have an exclude list. So if someone from outside wants to connect, they will be, not wants, needs to connect, they will have that possibility. For example, a log point engineer that needs to do some kind of maintenance work, or our playbook design engineer that actually needed to implement this playbook, they had to add his user ID into the list so that he will have access into their systems and will be able to make those kind of modifications, even if those modifications are on a log point system, but it's behind their firewalls and so on. So again, we create a SIEM static list with all the user IDs and usernames that are excluded from the policy, block all international access except for specific users. Now in this specific case, the complexity is not much more complex than the previous one, except for one small change. We actually needed to do a translation between the user IDs and the usernames, between the Azure kind of IDs and those that the customer was using internally. Again, every 4 hours, we ran this playbook, checked if any new user was added to the list or a user was removed from the list. If it was, then if any changes were made, update the SIEM list accordingly, and again, open a ticket on Freshdesk with all the relevant details of who had done this change, and so on. This is what this playbook looks like. So you can see already that the complexity kind of evolves over time. It also evolves over the maturity of the Security Operations Center. So when we start with an organization, what we first of all kind of recommend them to do is to start small. Don't go with your biggest and more complex playbooks. On the contrary, start with the things that are easiest for you to do. Start with the things that are kind of the low-hanging fruits that would give you the fastest benefit, not necessarily the biggest benefit. Then, as your security team gets used to start thinking operationally and start thinking automation, then you can start building more and more complex playbooks like this one or like the next one that we will review in a second. Any questions so far? So first of all, you have role-based for who can run the playbook itself or who can develop it. There's also the access into the different repositories within the SIEM. And when you generate an incident, or in the case management, you can also attach it to a specific type of role or a specific type of team to kind of look at that specific incident. So not everything goes through an automated response. Actually, the majority doesn't. But based on the severity that you attach to this specific incident, you may want to also connect it to a different team, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, a hunter or whoever within your SOC that you want to deal with this incident. By the way, this one I would actually open maybe even to IT to kind of look at, first look at what, at who had done the change. Was it a legitimate one? And then indicate within the SOC that this is fine, was approved by IT. So again, it's all about your existing processes, unless you want to change them, make them better, because now you have automation in place. I have until 4:15, right? Yeah, got about 13 minutes. So first of all, if you have questions, this is the time to ask. Don't wait until the last minute. Phishing email investigation. So first of all, we all know we all know what phishing email is. So an organization has received an email. That email basically eventually takes you to some kind of a website where it asks you to put your credentials to that specific website. And there are phishing and smishing and vishing and so on. Very interesting types of attacks that we see out there. And sometimes it also includes man in the middle that takes the communication from the real user, the credentials, and actually sends him back the replies from the bank, for example, so that he will not even know that he goes through a phishing attack at the moment, and he will only find out in 2, 3, 4 weeks. And he might not even remember the initial email that came into that convinced him to log into his Facebook or his bank account and so on. Is there an organization here that suffered from phishing in the last 12 months? 1, 2, 3. Most of you? Again, according to Verizon, I don't know if it's true or not, according to Verizon, 83% of the organizations have been through a phishing attack in the last 12 months. And some interesting statistics that I read, it's 83% that know that they've been through, and another 17 that are in denial. So I don't know if it's true or not, but phishing is still the #1 attack vector within organizations, and therefore this is the #1 use case that organizations ask us to automate whenever we are working with these organizations. Some of the phishing attacks that we've seen in the last year, the Lapsus group, Chaotic Spree, they were targeting NVIDIA and Ubisoft, Samsung, and Microsoft. How? They went to steal credentials via seeking to seek sensitive data and then to do extortion on these organizations. How did that happen? Using phishing. LastPass, they were targeting LastPass users because there are several millions of those, in order to then, by the way, try to do a second phase attack, kind of similar to the RSA attack from 12 years ago. So a phishing email to gain access to a DevOps employee of LastPass and then to their AWS storage. So this is an employee from DevOps that was working from home, so there wasn't all the firewalls and security controls around your organization, one of the changes that happened during COVID. And then that employee went through a phishing email, gave his credentials, thought he's actually logging into AWS, and they were able then to gain access to the AWS backup storage of all of the users' passwords. By the way, if you are a customer of LastPass and you were not aware of it, your credentials are in the hands of an attacker. They might not use it because maybe we're not that interesting, but I did have to go through all of my passwords and start changing them, and there were over 200 of those. So this specific customer, they asked us for a couple of use cases on phishing. I did kind of give you a hint of that before. They've implemented a button on their Outlook so that every time that you get an email, if you suspect that it might be phishing, you press on it. Now, there were some awareness issues here because the employees thought that any suspected email they should press, whether it's phishing, whether it's spam, whether it's just their ex-girlfriend. If they didn't want that email to be repeated, they pressed on that button. So when an employee reports an email as suspicious, the suspected email is automatically forwarded to the ticketing system and an incident is created. This was the process before Logpoint. Then an analyst had to go through that Freshdesk, ServiceNow tickets, make sense out of it, start taking, basically getting the header, getting the content, taking all of those URLs, start testing those URLs. How did they do that? We'd record some of them, by the way, with recorded future, others with VirusTotal, and the stock manager told me, I don't even know how they do it, they just do something. So they've investigated all of those. I see here a smile like, yeah, it happens in our SOC as well. This process takes a lot of time because every such URL that you need to copy paste, put it into VirusTotal, yeah, VirusTotal will give you an answer within 4 seconds, but it took you time to do copy, paste, take the reply, put it into back into ServiceNow, then eventually you get the list. Some of those phishing emails had just one URL, some of them had 20. In average, by the way, I counted about 13 of those URLs. So we went through the process with the customer. What do you do? How do you start the investigation? What are you looking within the header? You want to understand whether it's spam. Are you also using this, using that? Eventually, we came up to these 6 steps that we believe that this playbook should basically include. And then we built this. Now, again, building a playbook is an iterative process. You don't build this whole thing and then you hope, yeah, it will run. No, you build parts of it, you run, you see that it works. You have an API to your ServiceNow to get the header. Sure, let's first run that. Let's see that we got the right header. Let's see that it is all parsed correctly, and then do the next step. Oh, the next step is getting the body itself. Okay, let's run that. Get the body of the email. See that it was parsed correctly. Now let's list all the URLs within that body, whether it's 1, whether it's 20, or the 13 average. And then you have an iterative process of running for each and every one of those URLs. Now let's take this, let's throw it into 5 minutes, and then let's throw it into what system? Oh, now we need to decide with the customer, do you want to keep on using recorded future or VirusTotal or something else? Let's use best of breed. Let's actually ask all of your analysts which system gave them the best solution, and then let's include all systems. But then we can weight the replies based on what you trust more, what you trust less. So eventually you get one single risk score for that email, and suddenly instead of running and doing all of that investigation for an average of, the customer said 15 minutes, we sat with an analyst that was doing it really, really fast. Took him 17 minutes, and I believe that some of them, it took them significantly more than that even. This specific customer had 4,500 such reported emails during 6 months. This is how I got to the number of, the magic number of 9,000. Out of which, and this is the question from before, the majority were actually spam. Some of them were phishing, only 3 phishing campaigns. So and then the average time to resolution varies also between 213 minutes, 399, but in average 192. And this goes back to the question about what is the average time that an incident just sits within your queue. So if according to the customer, it's 15 minutes to do the investigation, it means that in average 177 minutes, the incident is just sitting in the queue doing nothing. That's 3 hours that for all of your incidents, basically 3 hours per incident that it just sits in the queue, and that's a huge risk for the organization. So basically, with and without SOAR, if you look just at that 177 minutes, that's a huge risk reduction, because an attack is not sitting just, is not going on while an incident is sitting in the queue waiting for you guys and girls to kind of solve it. I told you that it's an iterative process. So during that iteration, eventually we get to the full-blown playbook that we put into production. The first time we kind of run it, we see that there are some results. We compare it with the analysts that are actually doing it manually. The second time that and that was kind of the first time we just wanted to make sure that it runs. Then we made some changes to it, optimized it, put it back into production again. 71% verdict matched between manual and automated. It's good, but it's not perfect. The customer expectation was to have over 75 and over 90 in order to consider automated response. Well, the third iteration, which is after the following day basically, we had over 90% verdict matched on the third iteration. We were helping the organization save over 72 days, 30% of a full-time employee, just using this single use case of phishing, of reported phishing. And there is some monetary value here as well. There are best practices. I'm happy to cover them. We don't really have much time. So if any one of you also want to hear about the best practices that we kind of built over time, working with customers, with Playbook Design Service, helping them automate their processes within their organization, I'm happy to cover that. Also happy to cover kind of the Playbook lifecycle. How do we develop so that you can start doing the same within your organizations using the LogPoint SIEM SOAR. And if we have 1 more minute, one question? Yes?
I think there is something we don't talk about, and that's all the false positives that is triggering these playbooks also. So what is the average number? You talk about user accounts disabling them.
Mm-hmm.
That would disable, I don't know how many accounts if we don't have eyes on these playbooks.
That's an excellent question, and we did touch that a bit when I talked about UBA. So on a detection system, you might have false positives. When you do an investigation, now it's about the processes that you put in place that kind of helps you be sure of what it is that you're looking. So for example, when we talked about the 90% verdict matched, if the severity is, if the confidence that we got from recorded future and virus total about a specific URL is extremely high, we might actually automate it because we believe that there are no false positives or really a limited amount of false positives. Anything else, like medium and low, we would actually put it into a list for an analyst to look at it and make a decision so that there will not be user accounts that are being blocked or an IP that is being blocked and is used for trading within a bank. That can be a devastating issue. So some of the playbooks you want to fully automate, some of them you want to stop, get an analyst opinion or decision, and some of them it will run through, it will open a case, and then an analyst will make a decision on that case. But it gathered all the relevant information for you. Now it's about making a decision. Basically, automation is about marrying between an analyst's ability to make a decision based on business decisions of the organization and automation on the other hand.
Really sorry, we're out of time, and I think you're due next door. Who gets the t-shirt?
I think that you are. Thank you for reminding. And if I think that you deserve a t-shirt as well, I'll find you and I'll get you another one.
So, thank you, Doron. Appreciate that. Just in terms of logistics, guys, as well.